And welcome to our streamers. Welcome to our friends dialing us up here on Fox 13 Unscripted. As we start off 2025, I'm honored to have John R. Miles with us in studio. John's a speaker. John's a podcaster. He's an author. So glad to have you with us. How are you? Great to see you.
Mark, it's great to see you. Happy New Year.
Great to see you, too. How was life? Good New Year?
Life is good, and believe it or not, the last time I saw you was New Year's Day last year. You were at Stone Soup with your family.
It was. That's right. Oh, my gosh. How funny. Okay.
How funny, yes.
All right. We got to keep the streak alive next year then. Tell me about you. Now, we're going to hear. I love your stuff because, and I know I've told you this, but you have got an interesting past because you spent a long time in business. You reached nearly the pinnacle of the business industry. So you have been on stage with some of the biggest and brightest minds, yours included, of course. And tell me about that moment when you said, you know, this is I've reached probably the pinnacle of corporate life, and then I want to do something else. What happened there?
So it's interesting. I first met you through a mutual friend, probably around 2014, yep. 2015, and it was November 2017, okay. And I at that time had started my own business. I was doing what today they call fractional chief executive work. So I was working for private equity firms, and I wasn't really feeling fulfilled. But this one day, I took Olivia to Shorecrest where she was going to school, and I went to Orange Theory, and we had a fire of some sort in the electrical room, and so I went home early. And unbeknownst to me, someone had been watching my whereabouts, and I walked in on an active burglary where the assailant actually had my own gun and pointed it at me. And believe it or not, it was one of those moments in life where you've got a fraction to make a decision, and I ended up being able to evade him, got out of there, and then unfortunately, Mark, like 2 or 3 days later, one of my best friends jumped off the Skyway Bridge.
Oh, no.
And it was really those two things in short succession just kind of sat there with me and said, what are you doing with this life where you keep making other people's dreams come true, but you're not really focused on your own and helping people make their own dreams come true? So that started this whole new chapter in my life that I'm doing now.
You have you're the CEO now of a company called Passion Struck, and I love that because I have years ago when I was young. Thankfully, I had great parents as mentors to say, no matter what you do, you've got to enjoy what you're doing, and you've got to find a way to like it and, in a sense, be passionate about it. And I'm very lucky that I've had almost 30-some years in the TV business, and I do love my job, and I am passionate about it. But I also realize, I don't want to say most, I don't know the number, but a lot of people are not passionate about what they're doing and are just going through life, and that's affecting their output and probably their productivity too.
No, it absolutely is. And that was happening with me even when I was at what you would think would have been the pinnacle. I was a CIO at Dell. I mean, it doesn't, in my profession, it doesn't get much bigger than that, one of the top 10 CIO jobs in the country. But I had this lingering feeling inside that I just wasn't doing innately what I was supposed to be doing, and I really didn't feel like my daily output really mattered to anyone else. And when you lose that sense of feeling you matter, it really starts cascading all across your life.
It's almost like those, I mean, you probably, I mean, do you ever wonder if you didn't have the two moments that you did in 2017, that you still might have eventually realized that passion in another way? Or do you think that those are really the moments that said, I need to stop what I'm doing and really refocus my energy so I can be happy?
Well, I had originally felt like I got a calling, almost a spiritual calling, maybe a decade before that. But I think, like a lot of people, you get stuck where you are because you start making a certain salary, and that leads to the way that you feel like you have to live your life and how people see you. And so much of our identity is in our job. And so for me, I think I was trying to make this leap to doing something different, but it's hard to let go of something that you've built to take that leap of faith. So I
Especially
think,
when you have family and people relying on you, and you got to take a
all those
financial
things.
risk.
So I think for me, those two things really were the final straw that got me from sitting on the bench to realizing I'm going to take the leap no matter what.
And what was that first step? Is that when you started writing, or did you go immediately into some of the podcasting?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't either of those things. For me, I often tell this story that during this time to try to process the trauma, I started to see a psychologist, and he was also a career coach, and he started to talk to me about, the way you've been living your life, John. It's like you've been living on a stool, and that stool has many supports, but one of them is way out of whack, and that's the grind. You are so consumed with your career that everything else is suffering, and you really need to get your life on a reimagined stool with different supports. And so for me, I decided, those needed to be emotional health, physical health, relationship health. And so I think what people get wrong here is then they try to do too many things at one time. And that's the same thing when we try to set goals for the new year. For me, I realized that I needed to focus on the biggest thing that was holding me back, and that was stuck points from earlier in my life when I had experienced trauma and hadn't dealt with it and had suppressed it. So for me, that first step was really going and getting therapy. I went and I got cognitive processing therapy and then prolonged exposure therapy, and it was really letting go of those things that I'd been holding on to for so long that allowed me to get through those stuck points. And I think what ends up happening, we don't realize it, is once you make progress in one area of your life, it kind of cascades to other areas. So that opened up a better health routine, a better exercise routine, and then more creative elements started opening up, such as the writing and the podcasting.
That's interesting how you've gone through that and you see that, because I think, and I'm no trauma expert, I'm no grief counselor, but I've learned enough over the years to know when there is some personal grief and trauma, we all pull in and we retract. And the last thing we want to do is stick our neck out and especially try something new or take a risk during that time. And all of that matters when you're going through something like that. So it's fascinating. All right. Well, you mentioned a couple of things I want to get into. You talked about mattering, which I think is real interesting. You've written a book about that too. So we're all looking to 2025. How can we be better versions of ourselves like you've done? You're motivating and inspiring tens upon thousands of people. I know you have. How many podcasters do you have or listeners do you have? You've got over 1 million, don't you?
Yeah,
your numbers are crazy.
We've had over 55 million downloads.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Well, people are listening. We got much more with John R. Miles coming up. We're going to talk about that. One thing I love too, we talk about stepping into your sharp edges. We talk about getting out of your comfort zone. All kinds of motivational stuff that we're hoping that you will take to heart here as we begin this new year, and hopefully it's amazing for everybody. We'll be right back with John Miles. Unscripted, as we kick off 2025, we're looking for ways to make our lives better, ways to make our families happier with us around, and make us pursue what we really need, get the most out of each and every week. It's easy to talk about health and routines and all that, but I think it's much deeper, and that's what our guest is here. John R. Miles is here as a podcaster, author, and motivational speaker. Let's talk about mattering, because I know you've written Passion Struck, but you're working on something else too. What does mattering mean?
So I think people hear the word matter, and when you first hear it, it's really to feel valued, to feel seen. But I think of it as ubiquitous, like water, meaning when we don't have clean water, we can't thrive. And kind of the same thing goes hand in hand with mattering. When you don't feel like you matter, you start withering away. And there is really, Mark, some startling science and studies around this. The most pressing one that I've seen recently comes out of the barometer research from the American Immigration Council, and this showed just some startling facts. In America right now, 64% of people don't feel they belong in the workplace. 74% believe that they don't feel like they belong in their communities, and overall it's 67% across the country. But the thing that really struck out to me was that almost 20% of Americans don't feel like they belong in any shape or form, which to me really just brings out how important this is and why we're seeing the loneliness epidemic, why we're seeing so much disengagement in our workplaces. But I think it also ties into New Year's resolutions and why we don't achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves.
Sure. And maybe some unrealistic goals that people have growing up in this Facebook and Instagram world, especially our younger folks.
Exactly. And I call what's happening there the disease of disconnection. And what's startling to me is when you think of disconnection, yes, we're disconnecting from others, but I think the bigger impact is we're disconnecting from ourselves. And when you don't truly understand yourself, when you're disconnected from your own sense of mattering, it has a cascading effect. I mean, it's just like being dehydrated.
Sure. The hardest first step is that first step to say, I know I can better myself, and
Yes.
I know I can get myself. So but that's the challenge, right? I mean, so many people, you mentioned the grind. So many of us get into this daily grind. What's the most important thing somebody can do if they're watching going, yeah, I feel like I'm in a grind. It's easy to say you can do better for yourself and make yourself happy, but it's just not that easy.
Well, I just did. I just taped a solo podcast for this week. If people want to tune in, they can watch it tomorrow or listen to it tomorrow. But I did it on this topic of owning our cracks, and I was looking at the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, which really gets into to really look at incompleteness and impermanence as just normal steps of who we are. And I think we go into this year thinking, I'm going to do this, that, or the other, and we hold ourselves to these perfect standards that we're never going to meet. And what I mean by owning our cracks, there are things like what happened to us this past year with Hurricane Milton,
Sure.
Hurricane Helene. Like we were personally impacted.
Sure.
We had 3 feet of water in our house. Those are things we can't control and we have to accept. But there are other things, such as I know you love playing guitar.
Yeah.
I was trying to get back into playing guitar. I started out practicing, and then the hurricane hit, and all of a sudden I got out of it. Now, I could look at that as a negative, or I can give myself some grace and learn from why did I put that down, and then think of how emotionally it was because of my unmet needs, and to look at that, and as I now look at 2025, how can I approach it differently with more grace, as opposed to this condition that I have to be Eddie Van Halen by the end of the year.
Which nobody can do.
No.
Yeah. Well, no, that's true. And I love that message, because I think for a lot of people that think, well, I can just, I can eat better and I can just find a way to be happier. But, and I know you've mentioned this a couple of times about some of your own personal trauma. You've really got to be willing to say, you know, and a lot of us have some trauma in our lives, whether it's people we've lost, whether it's tough times we've had, and the willingness to step up and say, I haven't dealt with that yet, and I need to deal with that. And I think is critical, that I don't want to go, you know, misunderstood here.
No, I think that's a big one. And I think if you're feeling like you're missing this aspect of belonging or mattering, maybe you need to set different goals. So maybe the goals really should be, you need to be intentional about belonging. So ways you could do that, I love to go to Toastmasters. And for me, that's a community that makes me feel like I matter. It makes me feel like my voice is heard. Perhaps for someone, it's volunteering. Maybe it's working on a project with their church. Or maybe it's being creative, writing a book, writing something else, creating a song, creating a poem that reaches other people. But I think it's really looking at the things that you want to do with a sense of how are the goals that I'm setting aligned with what makes me feel like I matter, with my core values. And I don't think people do that enough.
Right. It's true. And it takes some strength. It takes some courage, you know, to stick your neck out, you know. And I remember when I was young, I remember the whole, you know, don't be afraid to go out on a limb, because that's where the fruit is. That always stuck with me for the longest time. And even in our business, we need to take creative risks as well. And they're usually fruitful, not to play on the pun, when it does happen. because at the end of the day too, and I got this from one of your podcasts too, and I remember, and I think for the longest time people think that success fuels happiness, but and I think what you do a great job with your podcast guests as well is showing us that maybe it's really the other way around. It's the happiness that fuels the success, right?
It is. This was actually research that was done by behavior scientists out of Wharton and other places that showed that we have the whole equation wrong. Success doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness leads to success. So the more that you can work on what makes you feel like you matter, what makes you feel like you belong, the more success is going to come your way.
Right. It makes perfect sense. All right. You've got a lot of great guests on your podcast too, and I think that's real key to your success. We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about visualization, which I think is really important, and I know it's important to you as well. Much more with John R. Miles when we come right back. Don't move. I'm still hung up on the disease of disconnection. I love that. Back here with John R. Miles as a podcaster, writer, entrepreneur, business leader. Thanks again for coming in with us. We were just about that disease of disconnection. We're so wired, and I know one of the points you like to make and share with your viewers is we're not very good at listening to each other anymore, much less talking to each other, right?
Right. You were talking before we broke about some of the guests that I have on the show, and I recently recorded this interview with Dr. Allison Wood Brooks, who, Mark, you're going to love this. She teaches the number one course at Harvard Business School, and it's how to talk gooder in business and life. But what she really specializes in is the science of communication. And
Sure.
as we were talking, she really made this point that has stuck with me, and that is because of digital devices and everything else, we're losing the art of conversation. And through conversation, when we really listen to someone, we really show them if they're seen or unseen. And just think about that. When you're really having a true in-depth conversation, do you make that other person across from you feel seen or unseen? So much today, we're so busy and disconnected from the conversation, we're not making the other person feel seen at all. And it has a cascading effect.
Sure. And it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle with social media because so many youngsters in the past 15 years have really grown up with that. And that all being seen, unseen plays back to mattering, whether you feel like you mattered in that conversation or whether you feel like you mattered today.
Yeah. Well, I had an interesting conversation today with a Columbia professor named Sandra Matz, and she's got a new book coming out. She studies big data and algorithms, but she was really exploring this concept that for centuries we have existed in small villages where everyone in the town, I grew up in a small town, kind of knew your business. They would get on you if you did something wrong, but ultimately you felt like you mattered. You felt like people were watching out for you. Well, now we live in a global village, and the difference is the people who are watching us are anonymous, and they're not like the people in that small village who had our best interests at hand. A lot of them are not looking out for us in the best lights. They want to manipulate us and other things. So it's how do you take charge of your life now that you're in a global village versus the typical small civilization, small family unit that we were brought up in.
It makes so much sense. We got about a minute left. I want to talk about something years ago that I remember that caught my ear when I was watching Tiger Woods play golf. And everybody thought, why is he so good? And Tiger just casually said, well, I just visualized the shot. I took it. And I thought, I can't. So being a hack golfer that I was, I thought, well, I'm going to try that at least. I started seeing things, at least pretending. It's almost like I'm tricking my mind that something's going to happen. And I think that made me a little bit better golfer. And at that point, then I started realizing the whole importance of visualizing something. And for the last 10 or 15 years, I've tried to visualize big things I wanted to happen in my life. And a lot of that happened. So I'm a proponent of visualization. I'm going to tell you it works. And I know you know it works.
Yeah, one of the chapters in my book is on the power of perspective.
Yeah.
And on this visualization front, the story I talk about in here is a Naval Academy classmate, very good close friend of mine, is astronaut Chris Cassidy. He was the chief astronaut, and he's also a Navy SEAL. And he was telling me when he was at BUD/S, it's so arduous to get through the day, not to mention the weeks. And he said for him, he had to just visualize. Sometimes it was just getting through the next 2 minutes. Sometimes it was getting through the next hour. Sometimes it was, how do I get from breakfast to lunch? And he really gave me this metaphor that has stuck with me. He said he learned to see his life as a rubber band, and that there were some instances where time was elongated and he had a longer time to look at perspective. And there were other times where it was a shorter horizon and he had to visualize how he needed to conquer the mountain in a much quicker way. And it has served him all the way to a famous incident that happened where he saved another astronaut because of that visualization technique.
Take the time, think about that going forward, and because it does work. So it makes perfect sense. You're training your brain, just like you with your golf swing, your muscle memory, just like playing the guitar, which you're still playing, right? I encourage you to keep playing.
I've got two of them. I got an electrical
there you go.
and acoustic.
Okay, good. Play the electric. It's much more fun. I can tell you that for sure. John R. Miles, please check him out. JohnRMiles.com. Is that the best way to find you?
Or PassionStruck.com.
Or PassionStruck.com.
And check out the book, too.
Check out the book. The videos are great, too. Has some amazing guests. His connections in the business world have really put him in touch with some amazing guests. I'm so glad you're able to share their stories with us, too, because it's great. So let's start off 2025. Find your happiness and find your passion, because I'm a proponent of that, and I know it can lead to great things. So, John, thanks again. Appreciate
Mark,
it.
Thank you
Happy
so
New Year.
much for having me.
Yeah,
Happy New Year.
See you on TV.